Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times. I'm the Man of the West, also from the Prancing Pony podcast. Let's keep week 52 going with today's Tolkien Tuesday. Now, we're spending this series, or at least as much of it as I can figure out, on Humphrey Carpenter's excellent book, The Inklings. Now, we will eventually get back to the revised and expanded letters in Series 8. For now, though, I'm moving further forward in Carpenter's book as we talk about the perception of these giants of literature. In a letter that Lewis wrote to an author who was proposing a literary inquiry of the group, he writes, "I do think you may be chasing after a fox that isn't there. Charles Williams certainly influenced me, and I perhaps influenced him. But after that, I think you draw a blank. No one ever influenced Tolkien. You might as well try to influence a Bandersnatch." Now, as much as I love the Bandersnatch reference and Lewis's recognition of Tolkien's stubbornly self-contained nature, it's the earlier bit that I want to focus on today and next week as well. The idea that looking for common ground with the Inklings is like chasing after a fox that isn't there. Carpenter looks into this in a chapter named for this quote and asks the question, were the Inklings more than just a group of friends? Some people have suggested that Lewis, Tolkien, and Williams saw their work as a movement which would in some way alter the course of literature, or which would at least encourage a particular kind of writing. It has also been suggested that Owen Barfield participated in this literary movement and that the philosophical books which he wrote in the years after the 1939-45 war were in some way associated with the work of the other three men. One critic, Carpenter points out, has dubbed Lewis and his friends the Oxford Christians, explaining that he uses this term to suggest a shared outlook and to connote both an academic and a religious point of view common to them all. Carpenter goes on to cite another critic who has declared that the work of these four represents a conscious attempt to present religion through the medium of romanticism, while a third has talked about the common Inklings attitude. But are these critics, who were unnamed by Carpenter but easily discovered if you do a little digging, were they right? Can there even be such a thing as a common Inklings attitude? Did they see their work as a movement to alter the course of literature? Never mind that their work did, in fact, precisely that. And could these men with really very different religious beliefs be lumped together as the Oxford Christians? Well, let's dig into Carpenter and take a look. Now, he starts by examining my last question first, suggesting that a good starting point might be the expression the Oxford Christians, because certainly Lewis, Tolkien, Williams, and Barfield were all Christians. But then, as Carpenter points out, it doesn't take much of a look to see that a number of strong qualifications have to be introduced to tie them together. So much so, I would think, that lumping them in like that might not make a lot of sense. After all, Tolkien held very traditional Roman Catholic views. Reading his letters, particularly the ones to his sons, reveals that he believed that prayer and the sacraments are the most important element of a Christian's life. In letter 43, he says, "The one great thing to love on earth is the Blessed Sacrament." In letter 54, he advises Christopher to practice your religion as well as you can, taking every opportunity of the sacraments, especially confession, and pray. Pray on your feet, in cars, in blank moments of boredom. And in letter 250, he writes to Michael, suggesting that communion 7 times a week is more nourishing than 7 times at intervals. Lewis, though, according to Carpenter, may have believed the sacraments to be important. Tolkien even acknowledged C.S.L., for instance, reveres the Blessed Sacrament in letter number 83. But Carpenter argues that he didn't find them to be the bedrock of his faith. Well, he's right. I mean, even a basic look at Lewis's life reveals that he came to his Christianity through an intellectual struggle, and as a result spent much of his time and effort defending Christianity from that intellectual perspective. For example, see Mere Christianity. Williams, on the other hand, seemed to come to that faith from a very different place than either Lewis or Tolkien. As Carpenter writes, Williams' vision of Christianity was idiosyncratic for 2 reasons. First, because he was a poet, and many of his writings on theology are in fact poetic vision rather than rational argument. And second, because of his interest in the neo-magical fringes of the Church. His principal doctrines, coherence, romantic theology, substituted love, reflect his early involvement with Rosicrucianism and the Golden Dawn. Now, you heard Serena Higgins talk a bit about these in last week's Fandom Friday, so I'm not going to go digging too deep. But with these vast differences between them, it's clear that, as Carpenter puts it, there is scant resemblance between the breezy outdoor Chestertonian Christianity of Lewis and the esoteric world occupied by Williams and his disciples. Now, I would add there's little resemblance between either of them and Tolkien's deeply traditional Catholic beliefs. But let's add the other primary Inkling to the mix now, Owen Barfield. Now, I'll get to more on him later on, but I want to continue for a moment in Carpenter's chapter to see the differences between these main four Inklings. He explains that Barfield's approach to Christianity had very little in common with any of the other three. While Lewis had reached a belief in God through his search for an exterior and objective idealism, Barfield had come to his anthroposophical Christianity through delving inwards and exploring the inner nature of the human mind and imagination. In addition, Barfield hadn't been a practicing member of any Christian church until after World War II when he joined the Church of England. But Carpenter adds that he retained his belief in reincarnation and continuing personal revelation from God. Well, not surprisingly, Lewis objected to this, and when the two of them wrote books about their individual religious beliefs, it became very clear how far apart they were. As Carpenter writes, Lewis accepted the Christian world picture as a literal truth. He was indeed very nearly a fundamentalist, and set about defending it. He also concerned himself frequently with the ethical problems of Christian behavior, and with practical things such as prayer. On the other hand, Barfield devoted his time to defending the anthroposophical view, without worrying about ethical or practical problems. As Carpenter says, Lewis expressed this profound difference between himself and Barfield when he said of his friend, "He has read all the right books, but has got the wrong thing out of every one. It is as if he spoke your language, but mispronounced it." Given those differences, it seems that Tolkien would have felt much the same as Lewis, if not even more so. Thus, as Carpenter concludes, so the Oxford Christians does not seem to be a term which holds much real meaning. For now, this wraps it up for this week's Tolkien Tuesday. Be sure to join me again next week for more on the Inklings as we look at the idea of a common academic viewpoint among them. In the meantime, please visit patreon.com/TolkienTimes to learn how you can join the Content Council and be a part of deciding what it is I talk about. You also can support the show, get an ad-free feed, and a bonus episode every week. Join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times for Word Nerd Wednesday. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube, you know the drill. Like and subscribe, follow or subscribe in your podcast apps, and follow @Tolkien Times on social media. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.